Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for conducting this hearing in such a fair-minded and deliberate way. And I want to join you in thanking Senator Sessions for his public service over so many years and his family, who have shared in the sacrifices that you have made. So I am sure that my colleagues and I appreciate your service and your friendship. This experience for us is a difficult one, not only because you're a colleague, but I consider you to be a friend and someone who is well-liked and respected in this body, understandably. And I know if you were sitting here, you'd be pretty tough on me, maybe tougher than I'm going to be on you. But it's not personal, as you understand, because we have an obligation to advise and consent to ask those kinds of tough questions. You and I have shared some experiences. Both of us have been United States attorneys and attorneys general of our state, and I want to thank you as well for thanking our law enforcement community, which is so important to this nation. And it makes sacrifices, and those sacrifices often are not only in time and foregone income, but also in lives. And I join you in respecting the law enforcement officers who were victims most recently of gun violence. I want to begin just by asking you a question which I asked in a letter. Will you recuse yourself from voting on your own nomination and the nominations of other cabinet secretaries?
I do not have plans to vote on my nomination. I have not thoroughly examined all the issues, but I think there could be a conflict of interest or a violation of the ethics rules, and I would comply with the rules.
I believe it would be a conflict of interest for you to vote on other cabinet secretaries, as they are nominated by the President, who is also your boss, and I think that I hope you will consider recusing yourself from those votes as well, because I think it will set a tone for what you will do in cases of conflicts of interest. And I want to talk a little bit about conflicts of interest, because I think that the Attorney General of the United States has a unique and special role, especially at this point in our history. He should be a champion, a zealous advocate of rights and liberties that are increasingly under threat in this country. And he's not just another government lawyer or another cabinet secretary. He is the nation's lawyer. And so any appearance of conflict of interest or compromising positions because of political involvement, I think, is a real danger to the rule of law and respect and credibility of the rule of law. So I would hope that you would consider appointing special counsel in cases where there may be a conflict of interest involving the President. And one of those cases involves Deutsche Bank. The President of the United States owes Deutsche Bank several hundreds of millions of dollars. It's currently under ongoing investigation. Will you appoint an independent counsel to continue the investigation of Deutsche Bank?
Well, Senator Blumenthal, I'm not aware of that case. I'm not in any way, have not researched it or even read some of the published articles about it. So I'm totally uninformed about the merits or lack of it of the case. I don't know that the President is implicated simply because he's borrowed from a bank. But I would say that as Senator Lee, I think, raised in his questioning, you don't want to be in a position where every time an issue comes up, the Attorney General recuses himself, but at the same time, serious questions, when they arise, the Attorney General should recuse himself on the appropriate circumstances. And I guess that goes with the appointment of a special counsel, which is a somewhat different issue. There's been a lot of criticisms of that, but I think it's a useful tool in the appropriate circumstances.
Would you agree with me that the Emoluments Clause applies to the President of the United States?
Well, the Emolument Clause applies. I guess the dispute is, and the discussion is to what extent does it apply, and how does it apply in concrete situations,
If
which
there's
I have
evidence,
not studied.
If there's evidence that the President of the United States has violated or may be violating the Emoluments Clause, will you appoint a special counsel?
We would have to examine that. I would not commit to this day, at this time, of appointing a special counsel when I'm not aware of a precise factual situation that would be in play.
If there is a violation by the President's family of the Stock Act, which prohibits the use of private or insider information for personal gain, will you apply special counsel?
Well, we'll have to evaluate that if such a circumstance occurs, and I would do my duty as I believe I should do it at the time.
I would suggest that in those cases, an independent counsel is not only advisable but required to avoid a conflict of interest, and I would hope that you would be sensitive to those concerns.
Well, there are reasonable arguments to be made for that. I suggested that Attorney General Lynch should appoint a special counsel in the Clinton matter. I don't know whether you supported that or not.
One reason I'm asking the question is that you have advocated a special counsel in other instances where, in fact, the argument for it was weaker than it would be in these cases, and I think it would be appropriate.
Well, I will suggest that during a campaign, sometimes we get excited, but as Attorney General, you have to follow the law, you have to be consistent, and you have to be honorable in your decision-making, and I respect the questioning you're raising.
Let me ask you about another group. I welcome your condemnation of the Ku Klux Klan. You may be familiar with a group called Operation Rescue. And Operation Rescue endorsed you. In fact, Troy Newman, the head of Operation Rescue, said, quote, "We could not be happier about the selection of Senator Jeff Sessions as the next Attorney General." Operation Rescue has, in fact, advocated, quote, "execution," end quote, of abortion providers. And as an example of its work, this poster was circulated widely in the 1990s and early 2000s about a Dr. George Tiller, who subsequently was murdered. After his murder, Operation Rescue said that his alleged murderer should be treated as a political prisoner. Dr. Tiller was murdered in 2009, and I'm sure you're familiar with this case. Will you disavow their endorsement of you?
I disavow any activity like that, absolutely, and a group that would even suggest that is unacceptable. And I will enforce the laws that make clear that a person who wants to receive a lawful abortion cannot be blocked by protesters and disruption of a doctor's practice. I might not favor of that. I am pro-life, as you know, but we've settled on some laws that are clearly effective, and as Attorney General, you can be sure we would follow them.
You would use the FACE statute, the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, to empower and mobilize the FBI, the Federal Marshal Service, or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to protect clinics if there were harassment or intimidation.
I would use the appropriate federal agencies, and I do believe it is in violation of the law to excessively or improperly hinder even the access to an abortion clinic.
Will you rigorously enforce statutes that prohibit purchase of guns by felons or domestic abusers or drug addicts, and use the statutes that exist right now on the books to ban those individuals from purchasing guns?
Well, Congress has passed those laws. They remain the bread and butter enforcement mechanisms throughout our country today to enforce gun laws. The first and foremost goal, I think, of law enforcement would be to identify persons who are dangerous, who have a tendency or have been proven to be lawbreakers and been convicted, and those who are caught carrying guns during the commission of a crime. Both of those require mandatory sentences. As United States Attorney in Alabama, it was a high priority of mine. I calculated a number of years. We were one of the top, even though a small office on a percentage basis, we were one of the top prosecutors of those cases. I think it saves lives, Senator Blumenthal. As a matter, my judgment at least, as experience tells me, it can help create a more peaceful community.
Will you support laws necessary to effectively apply those laws, including universal background checks that are necessary to know whether the purchaser is a felon or a drug addict or a domestic abuser?
Well, I believe in background check laws, and many of them are appropriate, but in every instance, there are some instances when it's not practical. Like, say, for example, somebody inherited a gun from their grandfather. Those transactions, I'm not sure, should require that kind of universal background check.